My name is Matthew Hargraves. I'm Associate Curator for Collections Research at the Yale Centre for British Art. My topic today is the artist Sir Peter Paul Rubens and his painting of Peace Embracing Plenty, which is part of the Paul Mellon collection here at the Yale Centre. Let me start by saying a little about Rubens. He was a native of Antwerp in Flanders and was the leading painter in Northern Europe in the early 17th century. He was also a diplomat, and it was while visiting England in 1630 on behalf of the King of Spain that he was given a commission that led to the painting of Peace Embracing Plenty. I want to talk a little about Peace Embracing Plenty and the way it expresses one of the principal justifications of the rule of King Charles I in the 1630s. The painting itself shows two female figures. One, dressed in gold, represents peace, and she stoops to embrace the seated figure of Plenty, who is dressed in red and carries a cornucopia, the symbol of abundance. These two figures were never intended to stand alone. The painting is merely a sketch, made by Rubens to guide the assistants in his studio in Antwerp, who were busily engaged on painting a vast design to decorate the ceiling of the banqueting house at the Royal Palace of Whitehall in London, of which Peace and Plenty is but a small part. Charles I commissioned Rubens to paint the ceiling in 1630, and it took Rubens and his studio 5 years to complete the paintings, which were installed at Whitehall in 1635. The complete design can be seen in this line engraving, made in about 1720. There were 3 main panels, all celebrating the reign of Charles's father, James I. The section which includes our Peace Embracing Plenty design is found in the left-hand corner of the central section at the top of the print. In the finished ceiling, Peace and Plenty are seen at the feet of King James I, who sits on a throne surrounded by twisted columns. Below him, we see a figure representing wisdom driving out fury and war. The twisted columns were believed by contemporaries to derive from the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, and we see clearly that Charles I wanted to present his father as the new Solomon, ruling wisely over his people and driving out war and discord to bring peace and plenty to the land. And, like Solomon, he is a king divinely anointed to rule. James I, the most underestimated of English kings, had cast himself as a peace-loving monarch, a Rex Pacificus, who would bring peace to the British Isles by uniting the crowns of England and Scotland, and who would be the arbiter of a divided Europe. James was a deeply learned king, a published author of books as wide-ranging as witchcraft and the dangers of smoking tobacco. His contributions to culture are many, including, perhaps most famously, commissioning a new translation of the Bible, the so-called King James Version, which has had a decisive impact on the history of the English language. Another of his most important cultural achievements was the building of the new banqueting house at Whitehall, to designs by the architect Inigo Jones. Begun in 1619 and finished in 1622, it was the first building erected in England in a fully classical vocabulary, borrowing from the architecture of Andrea Palladio. Wenceslaus Holler's print shows the sprawling Palace of Whitehall from the River Thames, and the radical intervention of Jones sits squarely in the middle, rising proudly above the rest of the palace. It was an architectural revolution, for better or worse, that shaped the course of British architecture for centuries to come. But the ceiling went undecorated until Charles I commissioned Rubens to undertake the task. James I and Charles I both used the banqueting house as a venue for the annual court masques, ephemeral performances that blended theatre, opera, and dance together. A new masque was commissioned each year to mark the new year, usually enacted with elaborate designs and theatrical effects created and engineered by Inigo Jones. The ceiling was designed to complement the masques, and for a while the figures of Peace and Plenty gazed down upon the annual performances. The cast of the masques was usually made up of members of the court, often including the king himself, and they all followed a roughly similar plot. First, the anti-masque, a scene of swirling discord and vice. Then a second section, where the virtues arrive to expel the vices. And then a concluding part, where the king and queen descend and rule peacefully over the realm, forever banishing discord and ushering in good order, peace, and plenty. They were just one of the many elaborate rituals that performed the ideology of Stuart power. Indeed, they were invested with an enormous burden of meaning, and were felt to not just represent reality, but to somehow make real what they represented. Rubens's small oil sketch of Peace Embracing Plenty represents perhaps the central theme of Charles I's court in the 1630s, a time when the king was ruling without a parliament, the so-called personal rule. He claimed to have given the nation a hitherto undreamed-of stability and good order. As the poet Thomas Carey put it in 1640, "Let us that in myrtle bowers sit under secure shades use the benefit of peace and plenty, which the blessed hand of our good prince gives this obdurate land." But while the maskers danced below the Rubens ceiling, they were becoming increasingly remote from the country beyond the court. Peace and plenty were increasingly exposed as a myth. As Carey was celebrating peace, a Scottish army had invaded England, furious at the king's religious policies. In 1642, England was plunged into civil war as Parliament clashed with the king. Charles lost. In 1649, he was tried and convicted of tyranny, walked through the banqueting house, under peace and plenty, and out onto a scaffold to be beheaded.